Her screams tore through the night. They beat her until her skin split. They laughed as the whip cracked against her back. Every lash carved humiliation deeper into her soul. They tied her hands. They dragged her across the dirt like she was nothing more than an animal. Voices mocked her. Spit struck her face. Her dress ripped open until it was nothing but filthy rags clinging to her body. They forced her to kneel in front of a fire. One man shouted that she was cursed. Another called her worthless. The leader raised his boot and pressed it against her face until she could not breathe. They called it justice, but it was cruelty carved in the raw heat of a summer night on the Kansas frontier. When they were done using her pain for their amusement, they left her broken in the dust. Her body trembled, her spirit begged for death. But some spark inside refused to die. With bleeding hands, she untied the knots. She staggered into the darkness. Every step burned. Her bare feet tore open on sharp stones. Her breath caught in her chest. Still she ran. Still she prayed for a miracle. By dawn, the prairie opened before her. The sun rose like fire, merciless and blinding. She stumbled across the open fields. Her torn dress clung to her wounds. The fabric was stained with blood and dirt. Hours passed, her legs collapsed beneath her. She pulled herself forward with nothing but raw will. Each moment she expected to hear hoof beats behind her. Each moment she thought they would drag her back to hell. But then she saw it. A lonely wooden ranch house leaning against the endless sky. A corral with 2 horses and a man kneeling by the barn wall repairing an old saddle. He looked up. His beard was gray. His eyes were carved from stone. He was Ethan McGraw. Once they called him the Black Vulture. Now he was just a shadow of that legend, living far from the world. She staggered toward him, her knees buckled, her hands clawed at the barn wall for support. He saw the bruises. He saw the blood soaking through her ruined dress. And he heard the words that broke him inside. "Please don't lift the cloth." Her voice cracked with terror. Her eyes pleaded with him. Her whole body trembled. It was as if uncovering her pain would destroy what little dignity she had left. Ethan froze. The rancher, who once made killers tremble, now felt his own hands shake. He crouched in front of her. For a long moment, he could not move. Then his rough fingers reached for the fabric. He lifted it. The sight made his blood run cold. His face drained of color. The scars, the lash marks, the broken skin, the cruelty written across her body was more than he could bear. This was not the work of bandits chasing gold. This was the work of men who wanted to erase a soul. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt something stronger than silence. It was rage. It was sorrow. It was a weight pressing on his chest, demanding action. Who was this girl? Broken yet alive. What horror had she escaped? And why had fate brought her to the last man alive who once swore never to lift his gun again? Ethan stayed frozen, staring at the broken young woman in front of him. She clutched the ragged dress tight against her body, shaking like a leaf caught in the wind. For a man who had seen blood spill across battlefields and saloons, this was different. This was not a fight for money or pride. This was human cruelty at its worst. He reached for his old coat, heavy and dusty, and draped it over her shoulders. That the girl gasped, not from pain this time, but from surprise. Her eyes darted up to his face. She expected more abuse, another hand raised against her. Instead, she found warmth, rough and clumsy, but real. Inside the ranch house, it smelled of leather, coffee, and wood smoke, the kind of smell only an old rancher's home could carry. Ethan sat her down at the table. He ladled out a bowl of corn stew, plain and salty, nothing special, but it was food. Her hands trembled as she lifted the spoon. The taste made her close her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt something close to safety. "You don't even know me," she whispered. Ethan poured himself coffee and leaned back in the chair. "I don't need to." His voice was low and growly, carrying both regret and kindness. She looked around the room. On the wall hung a single faded picture of a woman, his wife. The smile in the photo was soft, but the dust around the frame told the story of years gone by. Mary understood something then. This man had lost more than she could imagine, but he had not lost his soul. As the night settled, she began to talk in broken pieces. Not every detail, but enough for Ethan to understand. The men who hurt her were not strangers. They were traitors. Men who dealt in flesh instead of cattle. They had beaten her down until she believed she was nothing. Her eyes filled with tears as she said, "They wanted me to forget who I am." Ethan clenched his jaw, his hand tightened around the coffee mug. He had promised himself he would never raise a gun again. He had buried the black vulture years ago. But as he listened to her words, the past stirred like a rattlesnake in the grass. She caught the look in his eyes. "You are not like them," she said. He shook his head slowly. "No, but I was not much better once." Silence filled the room. Only the crack of the fire broke it. Mary wrapped the coat tighter around her shoulders as if she feared the silence would swallow her whole. Ethan leaned forward. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "They will come looking for you, won't they?" Ethan's question hung in the air. "They will come looking for you, won't they?" Mary lowered her eyes. She did not answer, but the silence spoke louder than words. The next day, the summer sun burned hot over the prairie. Ethan worked near the corral fixing a broken fence post while Mary rested inside the barn. The land was quiet, almost too quiet. Then came the sound. Hoof beats, faint at first, then closer. Two men rode into view, their hats pulled low, dust rising behind them. Mary froze. She recognized them. They were the same men who once tied her down and laughed at her pain. Her breathing quickened and her body shook. Ethan stepped out of the corral, his face calm, his hand resting near the old revolver at his hip. The men sneered when they saw him. "Old man," one called out, "hand her over." The other grinned. "You don't want trouble. She ain't worth it." Ethan said nothing. The weight of silence unsettled them more than words ever could. When one of them dismounted and reached for the barn door, Ethan's voice cut the air. "Don't." The man laughed and kept walking. That was his mistake. Ethan drew and fired in one motion. The shot cracked through the summer air, striking the man's shoulder. He cried out and dropped to the ground to clutching the wound. The second man's eyes widened. He grabbed his partner, pulling him onto the saddle. Both rode off in panic, leaving behind a trail of dust. Mary watched from the barn door. Stunned, Ethan slowly holstered his gun, his expression unreadable. Inside, Mary whispered, "You could have killed him." Ethan looked at her. "I only needed to send a message." He sat down heavily, rubbing his hands as if the weight of the past returned with that single shot. The ranch fell into silence again, but it was not the same silence as before. Mary knew those men would not stop. She also knew Ethan had revealed more than he wanted to. She had seen how steady his hand was, how calm his eyes had been in the face of danger. He was no ordinary rancher. That night, while the prairie winds howled outside, Mary asked softly, "Who are you really?" Ethan did not answer. Not yet, but his silence was a story of its own. Moments like this are why we share Wild West stories. Now, if you want to follow what happens next, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss when the past comes riding back into Ethan's life, because those men were not done. And their leader was a name from Ethan's darkest days. The prairie slept under a heavy summer sun, but inside Ethan's chest there was no rest. He knew the two men who fled would come back, and next time they would not be alone. By late afternoon, Mary noticed the change in him. He checked the Winchester rifle he had not touched in years. He walked the fence line twice, then sat quiet by the barn with his hat low over his eyes. She asked him softly, "Are they coming back?" He nodded once not long after. The sound of horses carried across the open land. Dust rose like a storm cloud. 6 riders approached, guns at their sides. Mary's heart pounded as she hid inside the barn, peeking through a crack in the wood. Ethan stepped forward, slow and steady into the blazing light. The man at the front pulled his horse to a stop. He was tall, lean, with eyes sharp as broken glass. Jedediah Kane, a name Ethan had tried to bury, now staring at him again. The riders muttered when they saw Ethan's face. Kane's smirk vanished. He leaned forward in his saddle. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "The black vulture still breathes." Mary gasped from inside the barn. She finally knew who Ethan truly was. The outlaw whispered about in saloons. The man who once painted the prairie red. Kane raised his hand, holding his men back. For a moment, the silence was heavier than the heat. He and Ethan locked eyes, and the years between them melting away. "I should have known you'd crawl back into the dirt out here," Kane said. His voice carried more fear than pride. Ethan stayed still, the brim of his hat shading his face. "You're trespassing," he said, his voice low. Kane shifted in the saddle, his hand twitching near his revolver. But he did not draw. He knew better. He had seen Ethan kill faster than a rattlesnake strike. And his men knew the stories, too. One by one, their confidence drained away. Kane cursed under his breath. He turned his horse, motioning for the others to follow. No gunfight, no blood, only the weight of a name that refused to die. The black vulture had spoken without firing a shot. Mary stepped out from the barn as the riders disappeared into the horizon. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You scared them away without even pulling the trigger." Ethan looked at her, his face unreadable. Fear travels faster than bullets. But Mary also saw something else in his eyes. The past was no longer buried. And now the past was coming back for him. What would happen when Ethan could no longer scare his enemies into leaving? The prairie grew quiet again. The riders were gone, but the echo of hooves lingered in the air. Mary stood beside Ethan, her hand still clutching his coat around her shoulders. She had seen fear in the eyes of those men. Fear born not from what Ethan did, but from who he was. Days turned into weeks. The scars on Mary's body slowly began to heal. She learned to rise with the dawn, to feed the horses, to carry water from the well. At first, her steps were weak, but each morning her stride grew steadier. Ethan watched, never saying much, but always nearby. He fixed her old dress, stitching the torn seams with rough but careful hands. He built a small garden behind the house so she could grow her own food. She laughed one morning when she saw him struggling with a crooked fence post, muttering to himself. It was the first time she had laughed in years, Ethan felt. Something shifted inside him. He had lived in silence for so long, burying his past under regret. Now through this girl's recovery, he began to believe he could heal, too. Her hope was a mirror reflecting a chance he thought he had lost forever. One evening, as the sun sank low over the Arkansas River, Mary sat on the porch, her voice was soft. "You saved me, Ethan, but more than that. You gave me back myself." He looked out at the horizon, his jaw tight, his eyes misted with memories. "You saved me, too," he said. The ranch was still just a lonely stretch of land, but it no longer felt empty. It carried laughter now. It carried 2 souls who had been broken, yet somehow fit together in their brokenness. Isn't that the way of life? That even when the world tries to break us, there can still be someone or something that pulls us back from the edge. Do we ever really heal alone? Or do we heal when someone believes in us? Ethan's legend as the black vulture would never fully disappear. But in the quiet of that summer, he found a different kind of power. Not fear, not violence, but the strength to protect, to rebuild, and to love without needing words. The lesson of Ethan and Mary is not just about the Wild West. It is about us. It is about carrying scars and still finding a reason to stand. It is about losing everything and still daring to believe in tomorrow. So I ask you if Ethan could find hope again even after all the blood and dust. What is stopping us from doing the same? If Mary could rise after everything taken from her, how can we not rise too? If this story touched you, give it a like because your support helps us bring more of these forgotten tales back to life. And make sure you subscribe so you do not miss the next story waiting on the horizon. 'Cause out here in the Wild West, every scar carries a secret. And every secret holds another.